The Advanced Stellar Combat Engineering lecture hall buzzed with the typical pre-class chatter of a dozen different species. Zephyrian clicks mixed with Altarian harmonics, while the crystalline Vorthan students communicated through light pulses that danced across their translucent bodies. At the back of the amphitheater, Marcus Chen sat quietly, reviewing his notes on a battered human tablet, an antiquated device by galactic standards, but one that had never failed him. Professor Kethvar, a towering Zephyrian with 4 arms and compound eyes, activated the holographic display. A massive warship materialized in the center of the room, rotating slowly to showcase its sleek design. The vessel gleamed with polished metal plating and elegant curves that spoke of both beauty and function. Today we examine the pinnacle of Altarian naval engineering, Kethvar announced, his translator rendering his clicks into standard galactic. The Starbreaker-class dreadnought. Notice the optimal energy distribution, the streamlined hull design for maximum warp efficiency, and the symmetrical weapon placement. Enthusiastic murmurs rippled through the class. The Altarian students preened visibly, their feathered crests rising with pride. The ship was indeed magnificent. Nearly 2 kilometers of gleaming destruction, bristling with energy cannons and missile tubes. The armor plating, Kethvar continued, gesturing with 2 of his arms, utilizes quantum-bonded tritanium composite. Thickness varies from 2 meters at the bow to 1.5 meters along the flanks, providing optimal protection while maintaining structural integrity. Marcus squinted at the hologram, tilting his head as he studied the vessel's profile. Something nagged at him, a gap in the design that seemed almost deliberate. He raised his hand tentatively. The professor's compound eyes swiveled toward him. "Yes, human Marcus? Why are your warships missing armor here?" Marcus pointed at a section just aft of the primary weapon clusters, where the hull appeared to dip inward, creating what looked like an exposed valley between heavily armored sections. The lecture hall fell silent. Every student turned to stare. At the human, expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed amusement. The Altarian students' crests flattened in what Marcus had learned was their equivalent of an eye roll. "Missing armor?" Professor Kethvar's translator carried a note of condescension. "Human Marcus, I believe you misunderstand. That is not missing armor. It is optimized design. The recessed sections house secondary systems, sensor arrays, communication, relays, emergency life support intakes. The armor there is reduced to save mass and improve sensor efficiency." "But," Marcus persisted, standing up to get a better view of the hologram, "that creates a weak point. Any enemy targeting that section could cripple multiple critical systems with a single hit." A few students actually laughed. Zixtal, an Altarian in the front row, turned around with his crest fully raised in amusement. "Humans and their paranoia," he squawked. "The probability of an enemy vessel achieving such precise targeting during combat is negligible. Our tactical computers confirm this design is mathematically optimal. Besides," added Vrex, a Vorthan whose crystalline form pulsed, with smug colors, "no civilized species would target non-combat systems. The Galactic Warfare Convention clearly states—" "What if your enemy doesn't follow your conventions?" Marcus interrupted. The laughter died abruptly. Professor Kethvar's 4 arms crossed in what Marcus recognized as deep displeasure. "Human Marcus, you seem to fundamentally misunderstand the nature of interstellar conflict. Warfare between advanced civilizations is governed by honor, efficiency, and mutual respect. We do not engage in the primitive brutality that characterized your species' early development." Marcus looked around the room, noting the mixture of superiority and pity in his classmates' expressions. He'd seen those looks before, the same ones he'd received when he'd questioned why the dormitory emergency exits were locked during sleep cycles, or why the station's life support had no manual backup systems. "With respect, Professor," Marcus said quietly, "I've studied every major conflict in this galaxy's recorded history. The Nexari expansion, the Vorthan-Zephyrian trade wars, even the recent Keth rebellion. In every case, the losing side was the one that assumed their enemy would fight honorably. He gestured toward the hologram. The Nexari didn't defeat the core worlds through honorable combat. They targeted infrastructure, supply lines, command, centers. They won because they fought to win, not to follow conventions. Professor Kethavar's translator emitted what could only be described as an electronic sigh. And what would you suggest, human Marcus? That we armor every square centimeter of our vessels? The mass penalty would be enormous, the energy requirements astronomical. Marcus pulled up his tablet and quickly sketched a rough design. Compartmentalization, redundant systems. Don't cluster your critical components in one vulnerable area. Maybe the armor there doesn't need to be as thick as the bow plating, but it shouldn't be a canyon between armored ridges. And if the enemy targets our weapons instead, Zixtal challenged, then you lose weapons, not sensors, communications, and life support all at once, Marcus replied. You can still retreat, regroup, call for help. With this design, one lucky shot, and you're blind, deaf, and suffocating. The room remained silent, but Marcus noticed several students looking at the hologram with new eyes. The elegant curves suddenly seemed less like optimization and more like glaring vulnerabilities. Professor Kethvar manipulated the display, highlighting the recessed sections in red. When viewed from certain angles, the optimized design looked almost like a target, a glowing weak point begging to be exploited. Perhaps, the professor said slowly, we should examine some historical examples of human naval architecture. With a gesture, the Altarian dreadnought vanished, replaced by a squat, angular vessel that looked like someone had welded armor plates onto a brick. It was ugly, utilitarian, and covered in redundant systems and backup components. The human Armstrong-class destroyer, Kethvar announced. Notice the distributed armor, redundant systems, and unusual aesthetic choices. More silence. But this time it felt different, thoughtful, rather than dismissive. It survived 17 major engagements during the Terran Integration War, Marcus added quietly, including 3 battles where it was the only ship to make it home. A Zephyrian student in the middle row slowly raised one arm. Professor, could you show us what happens when we simulate a precision strike on both designs? As the tactical simulation began to run, Marcus sat back down, knowing that the class would never look at optimal design the same way again. Sometimes, he reflected, the most important lesson wasn't about making things perfect. It was about making them survivable when perfection failed. The human way of thinking wasn't always elegant, but it had kept humanity alive through everything the universe had thrown at them. And sometimes, that was enough.